Non-Places, An Introduction to Supermodernity is a 1992 anthropological work by the French thinker Marc Augé. Augé was born in Poitiers in 1935. He began his work in Paris in the 1960s, and it's often thought to divide into three phases. A traditional anthropological phase centred on the Alladian peoples in West Africa, a European phase in which he applied the methodology devised during Phase 1 to modern Western society, and a third phase in which he developed the conclusions of the second. He died in 2023 at the age of 87. Non-places belongs, of course, to Augé's third phase. Part of its concern is how, and even whether, anthropology is still possible today. Chapter 1, The Near and Elsewhere, deals with the question of how even a glimmer of ethnological objectivity might pass muster in a world that's now fully interconnected. Surely, objectivity requires detachment. He rephrases that as a double question. Can an ethnology of Europe lay claim to the same level of sophistication, of conceptual complexity, as the ethnology of remote societies? Secondly, are the facts, institutions, modes of assembly, work, leisure, residential, and modes of circulation that are specific to the contemporary world amenable to anthropological scrutiny? The answer he gives is firstly that the here and elsewhere opposition is false. The truth is that anthropological research deals in the present with the question of the other, who can be found everywhere. Secondly, it's not that anthropology has become bored with foreign fields and turned to more familiar terrain. It's that the contemporary world itself, with its accelerated transformations, is attracting anthropological scrutiny. In other words, today's world forces us to become anthropologists, whether we like it or not. This leads him to present his primary contrast between anthropological place, dealt with in Chapter 2, and supermodernity, characterised by non-places, in the remaining chapters. We will reserve the term anthropological place, he says in Chapter 3, for the concrete and symbolic construction of space, which could not of itself allow for the vicissitudes and contradictions of social life, but which serves as a reference for all those it assigns to a position, however humble and modest. People who inhabit anthropological places see them as places of identity, of relations, and of history. That requires, or perhaps presupposes, stability. To some extent, the inhabitants of such places know they're entertaining a semi-fantasy. Of course, there are outsiders, some of them threatening. Nevertheless, their illusion coincides with the ethnologist's illusion, which sees the small-scale society as methodologically isolatable for research purposes. What produces supermodernity is a radical opening up of time and space. History has accelerated. Nowadays, Augé says, the recent past, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, becomes history as soon as it's been lived. History is on our heels, following us like our shadows, like death. Corresponding to this is a spatial overabundance. Television brings all corners of the world into our living rooms, and it blurs the boundaries between fact and fiction. What could be more realistic, Augé asks, and in a sense more informative about life in the United States, than a good American TV series? The third component of supermodernity is the individual subjectivity, which some philosophers believed had been removed from the equation. Individual people now want to interpret the world for themselves, so it's never possible to derive the outlook of a particular person from an analysis of the cultural characteristics of the society to which he or she belongs. It might seem tempting to say that the supermodern outlook construes the world as meaningless, but that would be a mistake. What is new, Augé says, is not that the world lacks meaning, or has little meaning, or less than it used to have. It's that we seem to feel an explicit and intense daily need to give it meaning. He seems to be agnostic about postmodernity, as evidenced by the words could and caricatured forms when he says, "We could say of supermodernity that it's the face of a coin whose obverse represents postmodernity. From the viewpoint of supermodernity, the difficulty of thinking about time stems from the overabundance of events in the contemporary world, not from the collapse of an idea of progress, which, at least in the caricatured forms that make its dismissal so very easy, has been in a bad way for a long time. His central thesis appears in Chapter 3. The hypothesis advanced here is that supermodernity produces non-places, meaning spaces which are not themselves anthropological places and which do not integrate the earlier places. Instead, these are listed, classified, promoted to the status of places of memory, and assigned to a circumscribed and specific position. It is a world thus surrendered to the solitary, to the fleeting, the temporary and ephemeral individuality, and it offers the anthropologist, and others, a new object. This is important because Augé's non-places are often discussed as if they are Alladian sites of anomie or alienation, as if to refute him it would be sufficient to say, but some people feel at home in service stations and shopping malls. That misses the point. These are places detached from history and, in a sense, from concrete space. They're interchangeable. How people feel about them, or even whether they work there, is irrelevant. In fact, it's possible to go further. If everyone felt isolated and anonymous in non-places, that would actually invalidate Augé's position, because he explicitly says we can no longer derive a knowledge of individual subjectivities from the society of which they are a part. Augé traces the emergence of the non-place to the writings of Chateaubriand and Baudelaire in the 19th century, though he doesn't say it begins there. In some ways, tourist destinations, he thinks, are the ultimate non-places. A person might stand in front of the Parthenon, for example, without really seeing it. This is me in front of the Parthenon, you will say later, forgetting that when the photo was taken, you were wondering what you were doing there. Anyway, that's non-places. It first appeared in 1992, but since then, it's arguably become more relevant with every passing year, despite, I think, the repeated misconstruals. It's a short read, less than 100 pages, and very clear. And I'll stop there.